In the beginning, before time had shape or color, there was only silence. No sun, no moon, no sea, just a boundless mist, a quiet breath that waited to become the world. And then, according to ancient Japanese myth, the first stirrings of life rose from that mist. A bridge appeared between heaven and chaos, and from it descended the divine siblings Izanagi and Izanami, the first creators. With a jeweled spear, they stirred the formless sea, and as drops fell from its tip, they hardened into land. That first island was called Onagoro. From there, the story of Japan began. But behind this simple image, a spear, a drop, an island, lies one of the most intricate mythologies ever woven by humankind. A story where gods are born, not in infinite perfection, but with emotions, rivalries, laughter, and grief. Where the sun itself hides out of shame, and the world must dance to bring back the light. It is a myth both cosmic and human, a reflection of balance between order and chaos, male and female, pride and humility, life and death. And unlike the cold marble deities of Greece, the Shinto gods of Japan, the kami, are alive in everything. The wind that bends the rice fields, the echo of water in a bamboo pipe, the glimmer on a sword's edge. They are not distant rulers, they are presence itself. Among them, 3 names shine like constellations: Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess; Susanoo, her storm-born brother; and Tsukuyomi, the silent moon. Together they form the celestial triad: light, night, and storm, the eternal balance of the sky. Yet their harmony would not last. The world they shaped was fragile, and the line between creation and destruction thinner than a blade. According to the Kojiki, the oldest chronicle of Japan, the drama begins not in battle but in emotion. When Izanami, the mother of gods, dies giving birth to fire, Izanagi descends into the land of the dead to bring her back, only to return horrified by what he sees. To cleanse himself of death's impurity, he bathes in a river, and from the drops of that cleansing, 3 divine children are born. From his left eye, Amaterasu, the sun; from his right, Tsukuyomi, the moon; from his nose, Susanoo, the storm. Thus light, darkness, and chaos emerge not from conflict but from grief, a theme that mirrors the paradox of creation itself, life born out of loss. But what sets the Japanese creation apart is its intimacy. There are no wars of titans, no thunderous hammers forging the earth, no jealous gods casting down humankind. Instead, the cosmos unfolds like a family, divine yet painfully human. The ancient chroniclers wrote not of distant heavens, but of mountains and rivers that breathe divinity. Every valley, every tree, every shrine still carries that memory. When you walk through the red torii gates of a Shinto shrine today, you step into that same space, a meeting point between myth and earth, between what is seen and what is remembered. And yet, beneath its serenity, the myth of Amaterasu and her brother Susanoo hides a storm that would define Japan's sense of balance forever. Because when light and chaos share the same blood, conflict is inevitable. It begins with jealousy, a contest to prove who holds greater purity, greater power, and it ends with the sun herself retreating from the sky, plunging the world into eternal night. But before that darkness falls, before the dance that will call the light back, we must first step into the ancient world, a Japan not yet Japan, where gods still walked among mountains of smoke and seas of silver, where words carried magic and names could shape reality. To understand Amaterasu, we must understand the mind that imagined her, the people who looked at the rising sun over the Pacific and saw in it not a ball of fire, but a living being, warm, proud, radiant, and easily wounded. Why did these stories survive when so many others vanished? Why do they still echo through anime, literature, and the national flag itself, a red sun on white sky? Perhaps because, unlike other myths that end in doom, the Japanese stories always seek renewal. When darkness wins, light learns to return. When chaos reigns, harmony dances it away. It is not just a myth about gods. It is the story of resilience, of falling, hiding, and rising again. That is what keeps Amaterasu's legend alive after millennia. And that is where our journey begins. To grasp the soul of Japan's mythology, one must first understand the land that gave it breath, a land of mountains and mist, where the sea wraps around every shore like a guardian spirit, and where the sun rises each morning not just as a celestial event, but as a sacred renewal. Japan is a string of islands suspended between the Pacific Ocean and the Sea of Japan, a world both isolated and intertwined, shaped by nature's extremes. Volcanoes sleep beneath its forests. Earthquakes tremble underfoot, like the heartbeat of a restless earth. Rivers carve through valleys dense with cedar and moss. And winters bring a silence so pure that one can almost hear the whisper of the gods. It was here, in this meeting of chaos and calm, that the first storytellers began to speak of kami, divine presences that dwell in everything that exists. They were not separate from the world. They were the world. A stone was not sacred because a god lived within it. It was a god by its very being. A gust of wind, a sudden rain, the shimmer of rice fields under sunlight, all were seen as manifestations of spirit. This worldview, known today as Shinto, does not have a founder or a holy book in the sense of other religions. It is older than writing, woven from observation, gratitude, and awe. Its roots are in ritual and rhythm, the planting of rice, the changing of seasons, the slow bow before an ancient tree. For the early Japanese, life was not a struggle against nature, but a dialogue with it. When storms came, they did not curse the heavens. They listened. When crops failed, they offered prayers to the mountains. And when dawn broke after long rains, they bowed to the east, to the light that always returns. It's no coincidence that Japan's national identity is bound to the sun. The very name Neon or Nippon means origin of the sun. And within that symbol, the myth of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, found her home. But before her rise, there were the chronicles, the Kojiki and the Neon Shoki, two ancient texts that sought to give divine roots to a growing nation. The Kojiki, written in 712 CE, is Japan's oldest surviving record of myths and history. It was compiled under the order of Empress Genmei, who wished to preserve oral traditions that had already begun to fade. Its language is archaic, rhythmic, half-poetic, a bridge between sound and spirit. The Neon Shoki, completed a few decades later, is more formal, more historical in tone, reflecting an era when Japan sought to define itself among the great civilizations of China and Korea. Both works tell the same story, but from slightly different angles. Like two mirrors reflecting the same flame, they describe a cosmos born from chaos, a pantheon not of distant omnipotent gods, but of divine ancestors whose emotions shaped the earth. These were stories meant not only to explain the world, but to unify it, to give the people a shared origin, a sense of belonging to the same divine family. For in the 8th century, Japan was still forming its identity. Tribes and clans ruled regions like small kingdoms, but through the myths of creation, they could trace their bloodlines back to Amaterasu herself, and through her, to the imperial throne. Thus mythology became not just belief, but political foundation, a sacred architecture of legitimacy. The emperor, according to these chronicles, was not a mortal ruler by chance, but the direct descendant of the sun goddess. Every sunrise was a silent coronation, yet beneath this imperial symbolism lies something far more human, a people's attempt to make sense of a living world that both nurtured and terrified them. Volcanoes erupted without warning. Typhoons destroyed harvests overnight. Earthquakes split the ground like a divine warning. In such a world, reverence was a survival instinct. Harmony, became not just a virtue, but a necessity. Even today, this sense of echoes in Japanese culture, in the etiquette of shared silence, in the rhythm of tea ceremonies, in the seasonal festivals that honor the kami of local shrines. The old myths are not forgotten. They simply live on in subtler forms. When cherry blossoms bloom each spring, it is not merely beauty that people celebrate. It is impermanence, the delicate truth that life, like petals, will always fall. Such ideas trace their roots directly to the ancient Shinto sensibility, where transience itself is divine. And as we move deeper into the world of these myths, we begin to see patterns that connect Japan to the rest of humanity. For while the islands were isolated, the archetypes they birthed are universal. The storm-bringer Susanoo, whose defiance shakes heaven and sea, mirrors the Norse Loki or the Greek Poseidon, spirits of chaos that challenge order only to restore it anew. Amaterasu, radiant and wounded, echoes Egypt's Ra, the Incan Inti, and countless solar deities that mankind has imagined to embody the light of consciousness. Even Tsukuyomi, the quiet moon god, reflects a universal longing for reflection and restraint, the night's wisdom that tempers the sun's brilliance. Each of these archetypes speaks to a balance that humanity has always sought, between creation and destruction, illumination and humility, self and nature. And perhaps that is why these myths endure, because even as centuries pass and empires rise and fall, the same questions remain. What is light? What is darkness? And what happens when the two are born from the same divine blood? As we turn now toward the origins of the deities themselves, the moment when Amaterasu first opened her eyes, when Susanoo took his first breath of storm, we step beyond history and into the realm of memory, a realm where words created worlds, and where to name something was to give it life. Before there were temples, before there were scrolls or shrines, there were stories, spoken by firelight, carried by wind. The first keepers of Japan's creation myths were not priests or scholars, but storytellers who saw no line between imagination and the divine. And at the heart of those tales was a family, the divine household of Izanagi and Izanami, whose union gave birth to gods, islands, and spirits alike. It begins, as many Japanese myths do, in a delicate balance between beauty and tragedy. Izanagi and Izanami, tasked by the elder gods to bring form to the shapeless sea, descend from the bridge of heaven, the Aim no Okahashi, and stir the waters below with the jeweled spear, known as Aim no Naboko. When they lift it, droplets fall and crystallize into land. This first island becomes sacred ground, the place where they will build the world. The two circle a sacred pillar and perform a marriage ritual, each greeting the other as they pass. But in the earliest version, it is Izanami, the woman, who speaks first. And for this act of imbalance, their first children are born deformed. Only when Izanagi initiates the greeting, restoring what was seen as proper cosmic order, do healthy islands begin to emerge. Awaji, Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, the foundation of Japan itself. From their union spring not only islands, but forces of nature, the deities of wind, sea, trees, and fire. Each represents a fragment of creation, an expression of life's expanding diversity. But birth is always shadowed by loss. When Izanami gives birth to Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, she is consumed by his flames and descends into Yomi, the shadowy land of the dead. Izanagi, devastated, journeys after her, determined to bring her back. Yet when he finds her, her beauty has decayed into something unspeakable. She begs him not to look upon her, but curiosity, or love, compels him. He lights a torch, and in that moment of forbidden sight, death enters creation. Horrified, Izanagi flees Yomi, pursued by the vengeful Izanami, who promises to take 1,000 lives each day. To balance this curse, Izanagi vows that 1,500 will be born. Thus life and death become eternal companions, a rhythm the world can never escape. It is from this act of purification, after the journey through death, that the three most luminous deities are born. When Izanagi washes his left eye, light bursts forth as Amaterasu, the radiant goddess of the sun. From his right eye emerges Tsukuyomi, the calm god of the moon, and from his nose, the wild spirit of storms, Susanoo. Each carries a fragment of Izanagi's own experience. Amaterasu, the vision of light that restores purity. Tsukuyomi, the reflection of restraint and darkness. Susanoo, the breath of chaos and grief. Together they embody the cosmic triad: illumination, reflection, and motion, a trinity that governs both heaven and the human heart. According to the Kojiki, Izanagi divides the realms among his children. To Amaterasu, he grants the high plane of heaven, Takamagara. To Tsukuyomi, the realm of night. And to Susanoo, the endless sea, But harmony never lasts long in myth. Susanoo, filled with restlessness and sorrow for his lost mother, refuses his domain. He rages, tearing up fields, howling until the very mountains shake. Izanagi, weary of his son's grief, banishes him from heaven. But before leaving, Susanoo decides to say farewell to his sister, and that farewell will ignite one of the most powerful stories in all of Japanese mythology. Before we reach that fateful encounter, it is worth pausing to understand what these gods represent, not as characters in a tale, but as reflections of human nature. Amaterasu is not merely the sun. She is clarity, order, the spark of civilization itself. Her light governs not only the world, but the human spirit. In her radiance lies honesty, respect, and the quiet dignity that defines harmony. Susanoo is impulse, the untamed storm of emotion. He brings both destruction and renewal. Where Amaterasu shines steadily, Susanoo moves in bursts, unpredictable, like the typhoons that lash Japan's coasts. Tsukuyomi stands between them, silent, watchful, the mirror that sees both sides. He is the wisdom that comes from distance, the calm after the storm. Together, they form a family of paradoxes. And as every myth across cultures reminds us, when opposites are bound by blood, conflict becomes destiny. Yet within this family dynamic lies something profoundly human. The Shinto gods are not flawless beings. They make mistakes, feel jealousy, grief, and pride. Their divine status does not separate them from the emotions of mortals. It amplifies them. In that sense, the Japanese myths feel less like commandments, and more like mirrors. They show us that even gods must learn balance, and that harmony is not given. It is earned through understanding. Scholars believe these stories were shaped over centuries, a tapestry woven from local animist beliefs, continental influences from Korea and China, and the island's own reverence for nature's unpredictability. Yet their essence remains distinctly Japanese, an unbroken respect for the beauty of impermanence, the acceptance of life's cycles, and the hope that even after chaos, light will return. And so, as the gods take their places, Amaterasu in heaven, Tsukuyomi in night, Susanoo in storm, a fragile equilibrium emerges. But beneath the calm, tension grows, for the bond between the sun and the storm was never meant to remain unbroken. And soon, one act of defiance will plunge the heavens into darkness. Among all celestial families imagined by humankind, few are as vivid and emotionally complex as the divine siblings of Shinto myth, Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Tsukuyomi. Their stories form the spine of Japan's spiritual narrative, weaving light and shadow into one inseparable thread. Each represents not only an aspect of the natural world, but also a force within the human psyche. They are less distant gods than reflections of the emotions that shape every life: brightness and restraint, fury and peace, loyalty and rebellion. Let us begin with Amaterasu Amakami, the great divinity illuminating heaven. Her name itself carries reverence, a weight of light that extends beyond the sky. She is the radiant heart of the Shinto pantheon, the giver of warmth, of order, of moral clarity. In every sunrise, the ancients saw her return, gentle, constant, yet commanding. Unlike the male sun deities of most cultures, Amaterasu is a woman, a striking reversal that speaks volumes about Japan's early cosmology. In a world where fertility and renewal were sacred, the feminine principle symbolized creation itself. Light, in this myth, does not conquer darkness by war, but by nurturing life through patience and rhythm. According to the Kojiki, her presence governs both heaven and earth. She oversees the weaving of the celestial garments, a symbol of care and order, of crafting beauty from chaos. Every act she performs embodies grace, and every story about her reflects the same truth. That true power shines quietly, without violence. Yet Amaterasu's light, though divine, is not unshaken. She will one day hide from the world, a moment that will turn gods into dancers, and plunge the earth into shadow. But before that exile of the sun, her mirror images, her brothers, must come into focus. Tsukuyomi, the moon god, is her calm reflection. Born from Izanagi's right eye, he rules the night with silence and distance. Unlike his sister's warmth, his realm is cool, restrained, reflective. He represents the order of cycles, the waxing and waning, the slow rhythm of time that governs tides and dreams alike. There are few stories about Tsukuyomi, and even fewer emotions attached to his presence. But one legend marks his fall from grace. He once attended a grand feast hosted by Ukmachi, the goddess of food. She prepared the meal by turning to face the earth and breathing out ingredients, rice, fish, and fruits flowing from her mouth. Tsukuyomi, horrified by the act, killed her in disgust. When Amaterasu heard of his deed, she turned away from him in anger, refusing ever to look upon him again. And so, day and night were separated forever. The sun and moon, though born of the same divine blood, would never share the same sky. This myth carries a deep poetic symmetry. It teaches that harmony between opposites can be fragile, that even light and reflection may drift apart. Yet it also explains the eternal rhythm of nature, a cosmic dance of separation that creates balance. Then comes Susanoo no Mikoto, the youngest and most turbulent of the trio, where Amaterasu embodies serenity. Susanoo is tempest incarnate. He rules the seas and storms, but his heart is restless, aching for the mother he lost to the underworld. His very name suggests wildness. The impetuous male, a being of raw emotion and unpredictable will. He is the roar of wind over the waves, the lightning that splits mountains. But he is also a paradox, capable of tenderness and heroism, as seen in later myths where he rescues maidens or defeats monstrous serpents. Susanoo's nature mirrors the Japanese reverence for balance. Destruction, in his hands, is never merely evil. It clears the way for renewal. He is the storm that prunes the forest, making space for new growth. Yet his inability to master that force sets the stage for his greatest conflict, the one with his radiant sister. In the heavenly court, Amaterasu's calm authority stands in contrast to Susanoo's wild defiance. Their relationship captures one of the oldest human stories, the tension between order and chaos, discipline and instinct. When Susanoo learns of his impending exile, he storms through heaven one last time, claiming he only wishes to bid farewell. But his grief and fury turn to destruction. He uproots rice fields, scatters sacred offerings, and lets horses rampage through the halls of the gods. To Amaterasu, this is not mischief, it is sacrilege. The harmony of heaven is shattered. In that moment, we witness a theme repeated across civilizations. In Greek myth, Prometheus defies Zeus. In Norse legend, Loki defies Odin. In Hindu tales, the Asuras challenge the Devas. And yet, Japan's version is quieter, more intimate. The rebellion is not against tyranny, but against loss, grief, and the pain of separation. Susanoo's rage is not ambition, it is sorrow uncontained. He does not wish to rule. He wishes to be understood. Amaterasu, wounded by his recklessness, retreats. Her withdrawal from the world becomes the mythic turning point of light itself. When the sun hides, creation trembles, and all the gods, even those beyond her lineage, must come together to restore what was lost. But before that legendary moment unfolds, it is worth reflecting on how these divine siblings mirror not only cosmic forces, but human emotion itself. In every family, there is light, the one who guides, protects, and steadies. There is shadow, the one who rebels, tests, and transforms. And between them, there is reflection, the quiet observer who sees both sides. The Japanese pantheon simply magnifies these truths into mythic scale. Together, Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo represent the eternal triad of balance. Mind, body, and spirit. Light, shadow, and storm. Wisdom, emotion, and movement. Their harmony births order. Their conflict creates story. And as the stage is set for the sun's disappearance, the myths remind us of a universal lesson, that light, no matter how divine, cannot shine forever without darkness to define it. Soon, the sky itself will break, and the world will enter its first night. It begins, as many great tales do, not with war, but with a farewell. When Izanagi banishes Susanoo from the heavenly plane, the storm god does not leave quietly. He shakes the clouds, his roar echoing through the valleys of heaven. Tears of rage and sorrow fall like torrential rain. Even the rivers rise, as if sharing his grief. But before descending to the mortal realm, Susanoo decides to see his sister Amaterasu one last time. He claims it is a gesture of goodbye. She, ever wary of his temper, prepares for confrontation. When he arrives at the gates of heaven, Amaterasu demands to know his intent. Is he here to cause ruin, or to seek peace? Susanoo answers with a challenge, to prove his sincerity through a sacred test. This ritual, known in the Kojiki as the Yuki, was both a contest and a prayer. Each sibling was to create new deities, from objects belonging to the other, to see whose heart was purest. Amaterasu takes Susanoo's sword, breaks it into pieces, rinses them in the sacred spring, and breathes upon them. From her breath, 3 radiant goddesses are born, symbols of grace and harmony. Then Susanoo takes his sister's necklace of jewels, chews and crushes them between his teeth, and exhales 3 male deities, brash, forceful, strong. He declares this proof of his victory, for his creations were born of her jewels, and therefore of her essence. Amaterasu disagrees. She claims that because she birthed female deities from his sword, it is she who has triumphed, for her purity transformed the weapon of war into life. What began as a ritual of unity turns to rivalry, and as in all myths where light meets pride, the smallest crack becomes a chasm. Susanoo, overcome by humiliation, erupts in fury. He tears down Amaterasu's rice fields, wrecks her sacred halls, and scatters the threads she has been weaving, threads meant for the robes of the gods. In one version, he even flays a sacred horse and hurls it into her weaving hall, a shocking act of defilement that fills heaven with cries of despair. The goddess, trembling with fury and grief, withdraws. She hides herself in the Amano-Awato, the heavenly rock cave, and with her retreat, the light of the world vanishes. The heavens dim, the fields wither, the oceans fall silent. Darkness covers both heaven and earth. It is said that even the gods, who are immortal, knew fear for the first time. Without the sun, the boundaries between life and death began to blur. In this moment, the Japanese myth reveals one of its deepest truths. That light is fragile, and harmony must be protected, not assumed. But the story does not end in despair. The kami gather at the mouth of the cave, seeking a way to coax Amaterasu back into the world. Among them is Aim no Yuzum, the goddess of dawn and mirth. Where others argue or lament, Yuzum chooses laughter. She overturns a barrel, stands upon it, and begins to dance. Her movements are wild, playful, her laughter contagious. As she strips away her garments, the gods roar with amusement, their joy echoing through the darkened heavens. From inside the cave, Amaterasu hears the noise. Curiosity, that most human of traits, stirs within her. How could the world rejoice in her absence? She slides the rock aside, just enough to see. And there, before her, the gods hold up a mirror, the Yada no Kagami, shining brighter than she remembered her own light to be. Drawn by its beauty, she steps forward. In that instant, Aim no Tajikareo, the god of strength, pulls her from the cave. Light floods back into the world. The fields breathe again. The waves shimmer. Day returns. It is one of the oldest and most beloved scenes in all Japanese mythology. A story retold for over 1,000 years in rituals, plays, and festivals. The dance of Yuzum is said to mark the origin of Kagura, the sacred Shinto dance still performed today, to invite the presence of gods and restore balance. Every movement in those dances, the sweep of a sleeve, the turn of a wrist, the rhythm of the drum, is a remembrance of that moment when laughter defeated darkness. And Amaterasu's mirror, the one that drew her out of the cave, became one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures, symbols of imperial authority. Alongside the sword and the jewel, it represents wisdom, the clarity to see truth within oneself. In that way, myth becomes more than story. It becomes structure. The imperial regalia still carried by Japan's emperors trace their lineage back to this divine reconciliation. The tale of Amaterasu's retreat and return was never meant merely as an explanation for day and night. It was a parable of balance, of the need for humility, community, and renewal. For in hiding, Amaterasu reminds us that even the brightest must rest. And in returning, she teaches that no light is gone forever, only waiting to be called back by laughter and love. But one question remains. What became of Susanoo? The storm that caused the sun to vanish? Cast down from heaven, he falls to earth, his rage spent but his pride unbroken. And there, upon the mortal plane, he will face his own trial, a test that will turn the destroyer into a hero. Banished from the heavens, Susanoo descended to the mortal realm in a storm. Thunder followed him like mourning drums. Rain lashed the mountains, and the rivers swelled with his sorrow. He had lost everything, his home, his honor, his sister's trust. But exile, as myth often teaches, is never merely punishment. It is transformation. When the clouds cleared, Susanoo found himself standing upon the shores of Izumo, a rugged province at the western edge of Japan, where the mist clings to mountains and rivers flow like silver threads. It was here, in the human world, that the Tempest God's story would shift from destruction to redemption. As he wandered the land, Susanoo came upon an old couple, their faces lined with grief. They were weeping beside a young girl, beautiful and trembling, her kimono stained with tears. When Susanoo asked what plagued them, the father bowed deeply and spoke. "We once had 8 daughters," he said, "but each year a monstrous serpent, the Yamata no Orochi, comes from the mountains to devour one. 7 are gone. Tonight it will return for the last, our beloved Kusanadaheim." Susanoo's eyes, once clouded with rage, now burned with purpose. "Give her to me," he said, "and I will slay the beast." In return, he asked for Kusanada's hand in marriage. The parents, desperate and trembling, agreed. Susanoo transformed the maiden into a fine comb, placing her gently in his hair, both to protect her and to keep her close. Then he prepared for battle. The Yamata no Orochi was no ordinary serpent. It had 8 heads and 8 tails, its eyes red as coals, its body so vast that it spanned 8 valleys and 8 hills. Its breath reeked of blood, and its scales glimmered like rusted iron. No human blade could pierce its hide. Susanoo, however, was not human. He crafted a plan worthy of both god and trickster. He brewed 8 vats of sake, stronger than any mortal could withstand, and placed one before each gate of the serpent's path. When the creature arrived, its many heads drank deeply until they fell into drunken sleep. Then Susanoo struck. With his heavenly sword, he sliced through the writhing coils of the beast, one head after another, until the ground itself ran with the serpent's blood. The final blow struck deep into its tail, and there the blade struck something hard. Curious, Susanoo cut deeper, and from within the serpent's tail he drew a sword of divine brilliance. That weapon would later become the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. It was the very same sword that would later be gifted to Amaterasu, as a token of reconciliation and peace. In this moment, Susanoo's story turns. The god who once brought ruin to heaven now becomes its redeemer. His storm no longer destroys. It clears the air. His violence no longer desecrates. It defends. Through courage and cunning, he restores balance between heaven and earth. When the serpent lay slain, Susanoo returned to the old couple and released Kusanada from her comb form. He built a palace for her in the clouds above Izumo, where the morning mist still gathers like drifting silk. There they lived, and their descendants, it is said, became the heroes and rulers of the land, bridges between divine and human realms. But the sword, that gleaming relic born from chaos, held a deeper meaning. It symbolized the cycle that defines all of Shinto belief, from impurity to cleansing, from destruction to renewal. Even the fiercest storm, once understood, can become a tool of creation. In later ages, this very sword would reappear in the hands of mortal heroes, Legends tell of Yamato Takeru, a prince who wielded kusanagi to subdue his enemies. When trapped in a burning field, he used the blade to cut the grass around him, turning the flames back upon those who sought his death. Hence the sword's name. It became not just a weapon, but a symbol of resilience, the power to carve one's path through adversity. Through these stories, Susanoo evolves. No longer the reckless god of rage, he becomes a figure of redemption, a divine embodiment of the human journey itself. We fall, we wander, we atone, we rise. And as the myth spread from shrine to shrine, his tale reminded the people that storms are not punishments from heaven, but necessary parts of nature's rhythm. They destroy, yes, but they also cleanse, leaving behind a world ready to grow again. The land of Izumo still carries traces of his legend. Shrines dedicated to Susanoo stand among pines and river mist, their torii gates facing the mountains, where the serpent once slithered through shadow. Every year, during festivals, priests recite his story with solemn rhythm, drums echoing like distant thunder. For to remember Susanoo is to remember the strength to change. And so the three treasures, mirror, jewel, and sword, come together at last. The mirror of Amaterasu, the jewel of compassion and connection, and the sword of Susanoo, born from battle but tempered by love. These are not simply relics of legend. They are symbols of what it means to be human, to seek truth, to feel deeply, to act with courage. Each balances the other, just as light balances storm. In that balance lies the essence of Japan's mythic world. The sun's radiance, the moon's calm, the storm's renewal. Each needed, each sacred. And together, they shaped the story not of gods alone, but of all who live between heaven and earth. When we listen closely to these ancient tales, of gods born from water, storms forged in sorrow, and light reborn through laughter, we begin to hear another language beneath the words. A language not of speech, but of symbols. The mythology of Japan, more than a collection of stories, is a vast code of meanings, each image carrying centuries of reverence. At its heart lies a deep truth. Every object in these myths, a mirror, a jewel, a sword, a cave, a serpent, a drop of water, was never just what it seemed. Each was a mirror to the human soul, reflecting virtues, fears, and lessons that guided people long before writing fixed them to paper. Let us begin with the three sacred treasures, those relics that unite the heavens and the throne. The mirror, Yata no Kagami, represents truth and self-awareness. It is not a weapon, not a shield, but a reflection, a reminder that clarity comes not from power, but from knowing oneself. When Amaterasu saw her reflection and returned from the cave, it was not vanity that drew her out, but recognition. She saw her own light, the divine within herself, and understood that to withhold it from the world was to let the world fall into shadow. The jewel, known as Yasakani no Magatama, is curved like a drop of life, half complete. It symbolizes connection, compassion, and continuity. Its shape resembles both the crescent moon and the embryo, a bridge between creation and rebirth. Even today, the Magatama shape endures in Shinto ornaments, a token of the unbroken cycle that binds all living things. In ancient times, these jewels were worn not as decoration, but as protection, a reminder that the gods watch over harmony, not hierarchy. And then there is the sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi. It embodies valor and virtue, but not the violence of conquest. Rather, the courage to face chaos and restore order. In its journey from the serpent's tail to the hands of heroes, it transforms from instrument of destruction into symbol of honor. It teaches that strength is not domination, but restraint guided by purpose. Together, mirror, jewel, and sword form the three pillars of a balanced spirit. Truth, compassion, and courage. They are the unseen code beneath Japanese ethics, mirroring the Confucian triad of wisdom, benevolence, and bravery, yet rooted in something older, the quiet reverence for harmony with nature. Even the natural imagery of these myths is symbolic. The storm is not mere weather. It is emotion ungoverned, the surge of instinct that must be tempered by awareness. The sun, constant and radiant, is both vitality and clarity, the power of insight that guides without force. The moon, ever-shifting, embodies patience and reflection, the art of seeing change without fear. And between them, the sea, a vast mirror where heaven meets earth, represents the soul's depth. The Japanese people, living surrounded by water, saw in the ocean both danger and life. It was Susanoo's realm, untamed, mysterious, fertile, a reminder that the divine is not confined to calmness, but thrives also in turbulence. Another enduring symbol is the sacred cave, Amano. It represents withdrawal, introspection, and renewal. When Amaterasu hides from the world, it is the mythic echo of every human retreat into darkness. The times we close ourselves off, wounded or weary, before finding the strength to step back into the light. Her emergence from the cave is more than the return of day. It is rebirth, the affirmation that joy can be rediscovered. This motif, of retreat and return, runs through Japanese art and philosophy. It appears in the changing seasons, in the way cherry blossoms fall to make way for new blooms. It is the essence of mono no aware, the awareness of impermanence, the gentle sadness of knowing beauty is fleeting. Yet, in that fleetingness, life becomes precious. Even numbers carry meaning. The number 3 recurs constantly. 3 siblings, 3 treasures, 3 trials. In Shinto cosmology, 3 represents balance, a point where opposites find harmony. It is the rhythm of nature, heaven, earth, and humanity. In Buddhist thought, which later intertwined with Shinto, 3 also signifies the cycle of existence, birth, death, and rebirth. And then, the serpent, the 8-headed Yamata no Orochi, symbol of chaos, fear, and the overwhelming forces of nature. It represents not evil in a moral sense, but imbalance, excess unrestrained. Each head devouring one daughter each year, mirrors the cycle of loss that life brings. Susanoo's victory over the serpent, then, is not simply a battle. It is the restoration of rhythm. The dragon's death is balance regained. In Japanese art, dragons are not demons. They are guardians of water and life. And so the serpent, too, is dual. Terrifying yet necessary. A force that tests heroes into being. Another subtle but profound symbol is the mirror of reflection. That faces not outward, but inward. In Shinto shrines, mirrors often rest at the center of the altar, not to display the gods, but to invite worshippers to see themselves. For the divine in Shinto belief is not above or beyond humanity. It is within, in the breath, the heartbeat, the act of reverence itself. Through these symbols, the myths of Japan teach without preaching. They do not demand faith, they awaken awareness. They suggest that purity is not moral perfection, but a return to harmony, a state where nothing is hidden, nothing in excess. And perhaps this is why these stories have endured for over a millennium. They are not rigid doctrine, but living metaphors. They invite participation, through dance, through festivals, through the silent bow at a shrine gate. They are reminders that the sacred is never far away. It exists in wind and laughter, in grief and renewal, in the rhythm of waves and the flicker of a candle at dusk. In these symbols, one can feel the gentle pulse of a worldview that sees life not as conquest, but as coexistence. And as the centuries passed, these meanings would evolve, their roots remaining in the old myths, their branches reaching into the modern world. If one walks through Japan today, past the neon lights of Tokyo, through the misty cedar forests of Ayase, or along the quiet shores of Izumo, the ancient myths are never far away. They live not in relics or ruins, but in gestures, festivals, language, and art. Everyday life carries the echo of Amaterasu's light and Susanoo's storm. At dawn, when the first sunlight touches the rice fields, farmers still bow toward the east. It is an instinct older than the written word, a salute to the sun goddess, whose warmth makes life possible. Children learn to clap twice before a shrine, to bow deeply, to wash their hands at the basin before entering sacred space. These are not formal rituals from a distant past. They are living conversations with the divine. The Ayase Grand Shrine, dedicated to Amaterasu, remains the spiritual heart of Japan. Every 20 years, the shrine is completely rebuilt, beam by beam, rope by rope, an act known as Shikinen Sengu. The old structure is dismantled, and an identical one is raised beside it. It is not a memorial to permanence, but a celebration of renewal. Through rebuilding, the shrine never ages. It is both ancient and forever new. This practice embodies a truth that flows through all of Shinto myth. To preserve something, you must allow it to change. Visitors who pass through ISC's torii gates often describe a stillness that feels alive, as though the air itself remembers. There are no statues of the goddess there, no images or idols. Inside the inner sanctuary rests only a mirror, the same symbol that once drew Amaterasu from her cave. In it, worshippers see not the goddess, but their own reflection, a quiet reminder that divinity is not to be found elsewhere, but within. Far to the west, in Izumo, the Izumo Taisha shrine honors Okinanushi, a descendant of Susanoo, the god of nations and relationships. Every October, it is said that all the kami of Japan leave their shrines and travel invisibly to Izumo for a great divine conference. During that month, the rest of the country calls it Kanazuki, the month with no gods. But in Izumo, it is Kamiarazuki, the month with gods. There, offerings of rice, salt, and sake are made to welcome the unseen guests, as though the myths themselves still walk the earth once a year. Even Japan's national symbols trace back to these legends. The red circle on the flag, the Hinamara, is the sun of Amaterasu, a simple yet profound emblem of renewal and clarity. When it rises each morning over the Pacific, it reflects the same story that began with the goddess, emerging from her cave to bring light back to the world. The mirror, sword, and jewel continue to appear in ceremonies surrounding the imperial enthronement, not as literal relics to be worshipped, but as reminders of responsibility. The emperor, as the mythic descendant of Amaterasu, is seen not as a god, but as the caretaker of harmony, a bridge between heaven and earth, tradition and change. The influence of these myths extends far beyond shrines and rituals. Their essence seeps into the arts. In No and Kabuki theater, where the dance of Yuzum is reenacted with fans and drums. In manga and anime, Amaterasu's radiance and Susanoo's fury find new forms. Heroes who fall and rise again echo the eternal pattern of hiding and return, light lost and rediscovered. The story of Susanoo and the serpent, with its 8 heads and rivers of flame, has inspired countless retellings. From ancient scroll paintings to modern video games and films, the Kusanagi sword reappears in digital worlds as a weapon of truth and courage, its edge cutting through illusion rather than flesh. Even the concept of kami, spirits that dwell in every object and place, shapes the modern Japanese relationship with technology. From the careful design of machines to the quiet bow given to a broken tool before disposal, there's a trace of Shinto reverence for the life within all things. Festivals, too, carry echoes of divine memory. During Matsuri celebrations, villagers pull great wooden floats through the streets, their chants rising like waves. Lanterns sway, drums thunder, and the energy of the crowd feels like Susanoo's storm reborn, not to destroy, but to awaken the sleeping spirit of the land. In the laughter of festival dancers, one can still hear Yuzum's rhythm, the dance that once brought back the sun. Even Japan's approach to nature and design bears the mark of these myths. The minimalist beauty of a Zen garden, the curve of a roof that seems to float like a cloud, the placement of stones to mirror a flowing river, all stem from the Shinto belief that the sacred hides in simplicity. The goal is not to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it, to find the divine in the ordinary. When viewed through this lens, the ancient stories of Amaterasu and Susanoo are not relics of a primitive age, but blueprints of cultural DNA. They shape how people see the world, as a dialogue between light and storm, discipline and emotion, reflection and action. And in that dialogue lies Japan's unique form of resilience. When disaster strikes, whether fire, flood, or quake, the instinct is not despair, but rebuilding, renewal. as if guided by the same rhythm that rebuilds Ise every 20 years. The myth of the sun goddess hiding and returning has become a metaphor for the nation itself, for its ability to recover, to shine again, no matter how deep the darkness, even in the modern age. As cities rise and traditions blur, the myths endure, not as strict religion, but as quiet memory, a mirror in the shrine, a sword in a legend, a jewel in the heart, each a whisper from a time when gods and humans shared the same wind. To understand the endurance of Japan's creation myths, one must look not only at faith, but at history. For beneath the poetry of Amaterasu and Susanoo lies the slow evolution of a civilization learning to describe itself. Anthropology, archaeology, and comparative mythology have long sought to decode what these stories truly mean. Where myth ends and memory begins, the earliest roots of the Japanese myths can be traced back to the Jomon period, a time stretching more than 10,000 years into the past. Long before writing, long before shrines, people carved spirals and faces into clay, burying them in the earth as if to preserve their prayers. These artifacts, the Doga figurines, depict beings with enormous eyes and intricate patterns, half human, half celestial. Some scholars believe they may represent early conceptions of kami, embodied spirits of fertility, protection, and nature. The myths that would later form the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki did not emerge in isolation. They evolved as oral traditions spread through villages and islands, shaped by centuries of contact with neighboring cultures, Korea, China, and beyond. From the Korean peninsula came metallurgy, written language, and possibly even early ideas of heaven and earth separation. From China came the concept of cosmic order, the balance between yin and yang, echoed subtly in the duality of Amaterasu and Susanoo. Yet, despite these influences, Japan's mythology retained something uniquely its own, a tender intimacy with nature. While Greek and Mesopotamian myths often depict gods as rulers standing apart from humanity, the Shinto kami dwell within creation itself, in stones, streams, and silence. This closeness between spirit and world may reflect Japan's geography, a land isolated by sea, yet restless beneath. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and typhoons reminded its people that the divine was not distant, but immediate and unpredictable. Archaeological evidence also supports that these myths served a social function. The Kojiki, compiled in the 8th century, was not merely a collection of sacred tales. It was a unifying manuscript, a way for the Yamato court to assert its divine legitimacy. By tracing imperial ancestry back to Amaterasu, the rulers of Japan anchored political power in cosmic order. In this sense, mythology became statecraft, a sacred genealogy written into history. But what fascinates scholars most is how these stories balance mythic imagination with psychological truth. The Amano Iwado story, for instance, the retreat of the sun goddess into her cave, has been interpreted through multiple lenses. Anthropologists view it as an agricultural allegory, the seasonal disappearance of the sun, the barren winter that ends with spring's return. Psychologists, meanwhile, see in it a symbol of depression and renewal, the necessity of darkness before light can be appreciated again. Even the Yamata no Orochi myth has scientific and environmental interpretations. Some suggest the 8-headed serpent represents 8 rivers, flooding the Izumo plains, tamed through early irrigation projects. The drunken dragon, lulled by sake, may describe the calming of floods, through the building of dams and channels. Thus, what reads as divine battle may actually preserve the memory of human innovation. The mirror, sword, and jewel, too, may once have been tangible regalia of tribal leaders, later elevated into cosmic symbols. Archaeological digs across Japan have unearthed bronze mirrors and curved magatama jewels, buried with ancient chiefs, tokens of status, now immortalized in myth. Yet science alone cannot exhaust their meaning. To reduce myth to metaphor is to overlook its power to speak to the human condition. For whether or not Amaterasu truly hid in a cave is beside the point. What matters is why people needed her to. Myths survive because they address what facts cannot. They offer moral geometry, mapping emotions that science can measure, but never resolve. They speak to loss, guilt, redemption, and renewal, the same forces that shape every human life. Modern anthropology now views Shinto myths as expressions of cultural ecology. They evolved not to explain the world in scientific terms, but to align society with its environment. By personifying storms, mountains, and rivers, early Japan learned to live with them, not against them. This relationship fostered resilience, the capacity to rebuild after every disaster, to find order in impermanence. In that sense, Shinto is less a religion than a dialogue, an ever-evolving conversation between humanity and nature. Even as Buddhism and later Western ideas entered Japan, the old myths never disappeared. They simply adapted. Buddhism brought the concept of reincarnation, which found harmony with Shinto's belief in cyclical renewal. The two coexisted not as rivals, but as complementary ways of seeing the same mystery. Today, scientists and philosophers alike find in these stories a profound ecological wisdom. They remind us that divinity is not found above, but within the balance of systems, that every act of destruction invites renewal, and every renewal owes a debt to what came before. Even neuroscience, in its study of myth and ritual, suggests that such stories strengthen empathy and cooperation. Shared symbols trigger emotional resonance, allowing individuals to feel part of something larger than themselves. In that light, the legend of Amaterasu is not merely the tale of a goddess returning, but the memory of a people learning to find unity through hope. And perhaps that is the truest bridge between science and tradition, that both seek understanding, not dominance. Where myth uses narrative, science uses observation. Where one speaks to the heart, the other to the mind. Together, they complete the circle, like the sun and the moon, each illuminating what the other cannot. The ancient Japanese understood this balance intuitively. Their stories were never meant to be believed blindly, but lived through ritual, art, and daily mindfulness. To bow to a tree, to rebuild a shrine, to tell an old story anew. These are acts of quiet alignment between memory and the present. And so, as we move toward the end of this journey, we might ask, what do these myths still mean? In an age of satellites, skyscrapers, and neon suns, why does the story of a goddess who hid in a cave still move those who live by electric light? The answer lies in the one lesson that science, history, and legend all share. That every light, no matter how bright, must sometimes fade, and every dawn that follows is a miracle renewed. There is a moment, just before dawn, when the sky above Japan turns from ink to pearl. It is silent then, the world waiting, breath held, for the first line of sunlight to crest the horizon. That quiet heartbeat of light is more than a sunrise. It is the same act that began time itself in the Shinto imagination. Amaterasu's return, replayed endlessly. The promise that even after darkness, the world will open its eyes again. That is the power of myth. Not to bind us to the past, but to teach us how to live in the present. The stories of ancient Japan have survived because they speak to what endures in the human spirit. Our need for meaning, for beauty, for reconciliation with the chaos of existence. When the first chroniclers wrote the Kojiki in the 8th century, they could not have imagined skyscrapers, satellites, or space probes, carrying Japan's name beyond the stars. And yet, if they could see today's rising sun, painted on every flag, every passport, every rocket, they would understand that their myths have not vanished. They have evolved. The symbols remain the same. The mirror, truth. The jewel, connection. The sword, courage. But now they exist in subtler forms. In art that reflects honesty. In empathy that connects strangers. In determination that drives innovation. Amaterasu's light is found not only in the morning sun, but in every act of creation. Every child learning to write. Every architect shaping glass to catch the sky. Every musician breathing emotion into sound. Her radiance endures wherever the human heart insists on beauty. Despite the weight of shadow, Susanoo's storm, too, is still with us. In the restlessness that drives change. in the daring that builds bridges and sails across unknown seas. The same passion that once tore the heavens apart now fuels invention and courage. And Tsukuyomi, the quiet moon, still guides reflection in the long pauses between progress, in the serenity that teaches us when to stop, to breathe, to see. These myths survive because they describe balance, not perfection. They remind us that creation and destruction are partners, that light without shadow blinds, and shadow without light suffocates. In a world driven by speed and ambition, they whisper an older rhythm, one of patience, gratitude, and return. In the simplest Shinto shrines, a single rope of straw hangs across a gate, a shimenawa. It marks the boundary between the ordinary and the sacred. But in truth, that boundary is everywhere. Each time we pause before something beautiful, each time we feel awe or humility, we cross into that same sacred space. The rope is invisible, but it binds us still. From an anthropological view, these stories might be reflections of weather, agriculture, and politics. But emotionally, they are maps of the soul. They chart how humanity learns from loss, how we rebuild trust, how we dance light back into our own lives. That is why their details, the jewels, the storms, the caves, still feel familiar. They are metaphors for the moments we all live through. Anger, exile, forgiveness, return. Consider how often in life we become our own Amaterasu, hiding from a world that has hurt us, retreating into darkness, believing our absence will not be felt. But just as laughter and song drew her from her cave, so too can kindness draw us back into light. Or think of Susanoo, the wildness that lives in every heart, the impulse to destroy what we love when we feel unseen. His story reminds us that redemption is possible, that even storms can turn protectors when given purpose. And Tsukuyomi, his quiet distance is not apathy, but contemplation. He teaches that not all wisdom is loud, that reflection can heal as surely as fire can warm. These divine archetypes live in us still, shaping the rhythm of our choices. The myths endure because they mirror our interior landscape, the mountains of pride, the rivers of emotion, the caves of solitude, the dawns of forgiveness. In modern Japan, technology hums where once only the wind spoke, but shrines still stand at the edges of cities. Commuters in suits still pause to bow before entering the world. Children still clap before tossing a coin into an offering box. Even the act of bowing, that small, silent gesture of respect, is a continuation of the ancient dance of Yuzum, an acknowledgement that reverence can live in motion. And perhaps this is the greatest legacy of Japan's myths. Their humility. They never claimed ownership of the divine. They invited it to share space with humanity. They never demanded belief. They inspired awareness. They never ended in apocalypse. They ended in renewal. For 1,000 years, the sun has risen on the red disk of Japan's flag. Its circle simple, eternal, alive. To the world, it is a symbol of a nation. To those who remember the old stories, it is the eye of Amaterasu, the same eye that watched the birth of the islands, the same light that withdrew and returned. Her story, and those of her kin, are reminders that the sacred is not a place we visit, but a state we remember. Every dawn, every storm, every reflection in still water is a retelling of that first creation, a reminder that life, like myth, is an unending act of becoming. And so, when the sun rises tomorrow, whether you are standing on the shores of Izumo or in a city far from the sea, look toward the east, for that golden light climbing over the horizon is the same light that first broke the silence of eternity. The same warmth that once drew a goddess from her cave. It is the light that says, the story continues.